Welcome back to Anvil Do Miniatures. My name is Deets and I hope you've all been doing well. I've been a little bit bored of painting lately, so this week I decided to mix things up and get into some more sculpting. If you've seen some of my previous videos, you've seen me try to sculpt some Chaos Dwarfs, but there's something wrong with me. I have a huge issue with scale creep when I'm sculpting miniatures, probably worse than what GW has with their scale creep. So I thought I'd avoid the pain of sculpting another giant Chaos Dwarf and instead sculpt a giant. Because those things are so large, I couldn't really stuff that up. Or could I? So I got the wire and the alfoil out, made an armature, and then started sculpting with some clay. And I was having a bit of fun with this at the start, but after a few days of this, I started to get a little bit bored. I was looking at and researching all these awesome Warhammer giant sculpts, but I don't know why, I just had no inspiration to do this. Usually when I'm doing a project for this channel or for myself, I have a huge wave of inspiration and I can go for days on end until I kind of get to the last point and get really tired and get sick of it. I don't know why, I was just lacking it this week. But this is where the project kind of takes a turn. I was sitting here watching some Total War Warhammer clips and videos, mainly of Chaos Dwarfs, and in one video I saw this awesome machine come straight through the guts of an army, and it was this bad boy, the Chaos Dwarf Daemon engine. And I thought to myself, my army needs one of these really bad, so let's throw the giant out and get started on this guy. Now this will be my second ever attempt at a scratch build or a Kitbash kind of project, so bear with me. My main goal for this Daemon engine is to make it look like it fits in with my 4th edition Chaos Dwarf army, so that means it will need to look a bit kooky. I'm using bits of a Dwarf flame cannon, a death rocket, some old black orcs, and I'll scratch build the rest with some polymer clay. I think using parts from older Warhammer ranges will help me with getting the aesthetic I'm after, and I have to give a shout out to my mate Zograt and Adam of Doom, as they sent me these pieces a while ago that will act as the main components for this beast. I've stripped the old paint off the dwarf cannon and cut off the muzzle because I just want the main large tank part of the flame cannon. The Daemon engine is kind of like a big steam train looking machine, so I'll be salvaging parts from this dwarf kit that will work well, and I'll remove any Dawi symbols. And I know I'll definitely be going in the book for this. With the leftover dwarf parts, I'm thinking about making a dwarf steam tank later on down the line, so let me know down in the comments below if you'd like to see that. Let's make the chassis or frame of this machine, and I'll do this now so I can build off it and have the size of the model decided early on in the process. I'm going to draw up a rectangle on some paper about 50mm by 25mm using a 2B pencil. It's time to bust out the polymer clay, and I love this stuff because it's super simple and easy to work with, as it only hardens up when you throw it in the oven. I roll it out and then stamp it on my rectangular stencil, and because I use a 2B pencil, it will imprint the shape I want on the clay, and I can simply cut it out with my knife. I then throw some wire down the center of it, and I do this just to reinforce it, just as you would concrete in the real world, I guess, and then I throw it in the oven to harden up. The Dwarf Flame Cannon also had a platform that I'm going to use for my Chorf crew to stand on. I'm just trimming off the big block on the bottom to make it fit better, and I'll also need to elevate the tank part of the machine, so I get a cube of clay and press the tank down on it to give it an imprint so it sits nice and snug. Now I don't want the tank part to sit out in the open because I'm guessing it would make a really easy target on the battlefield, so I'll make 2 panels that sit on either side using some plastic card. I was recommended this product on an older video, and after doing 3 laps at my local Bunnings, I did manage to find some. The staff didn't have a clue what I was talking about. I was thinking about sculpting the side walls with some more polymer clay, but I didn't want them to look too bumpy. I could get away with it for the frame, but these parts will be in your face, so it's not worth the risk. As this is a heavy piece of machinery, I want to make it look like it's held together with steel and rivets, so I'll add some framing to the sides. I'm going to flatten some clay and then press my side walls down to give it an imprint, and then I'll cut these out with my knife. As you can see, I'm doing a lot of imprinting and measuring with this build, and that's because I do think not cutting corners and measuring things out correctly when it comes to building things that need some sort of symmetry will make life much easier and make the project more enjoyable. Kit bashing and scratch building is something I'm relatively new at, but it's a skill I want to learn because as satisfying as painting is, scratch building, sculpting, and then painting that final product takes the satisfaction to another level. I watch a fair bit of Pete the Wargamer and fellow Aussie Miscast, who are 2 very talented kit bashers and creators, and you could say that they're on opposite sides of the spectrum when it comes to creating, but what I take away from these guys' videos and creations is that precision and having some sort of artistic flair or style is where I want to be with my kit bashing. So if that involves taking more time to measure up things or more steps to make that thing a bit more weird, I'll do it. Now I had a bit of vacant space on the wall, so I thought to myself, why not slap a couple skulls on there for our Lord and Savior, Hashut. I'm sure he'd really appreciate them. Once I was happy with that, I then drilled some holes in the bottom of these little walls, filled them with some wire and stuck them to the frame, and this was the point where I could finally start to see this project come to life. Unfortunately, I don't own that many of those classic Warhammer wheels, and they're getting a bit harder to find these days, so I'm going to pivot and use the wheels just for the front of the machine, and also for the Death Rocket trailer that will be attached onto the back, which you'll see later on in this video. For where the back wheels would be, I'm going to give it some little skis to slide on instead. I know this sounds funny, but as I said at the start of the video, please bear with me. I had some great looking timber beams left over from my fortified manor that I could put on either side of the chassis, and I made the skis out of some more clay. I made sure these lined up, and I'll stick them on later after I finish painting in the building phase of the project. Now, how would this thing plow through scores of soldiers and inflict maximum carnage? With a cluster of sharp blades strapped onto the front, of course. I noticed that one of the sprues had a great angle, so I trimmed it off, cleaned it up, and stuck it to the front of the machine. I have a few of these old black orcs laying around. Most of them were broken, so I'm going to sacrifice their axes for the blades. I secure these on with some wire, super glue, and then glue on some balls of hardened clay to give it that riveted sort of look to the front of the machine. I glue the leftover spikes from the axes to the front wheels in hope that it will make this Dwarf go-kart look a bit more mean. The more I looked at this thing, the more I thought it needed some extras here and there. So using that plastic card I had left over and my sharp knife, I carved out some spikes which I then glued onto the top of the sidewalls. Now this Daemon engine has been missing some firepower, and this thing is meant to spit out some steam driven shrapnel out of its guns, and on the Forge World version of this thing, and also on the Total War Games version, it has these two guns on each side. But due to the size of the tanks that will sit on either side, I won't have much room to fit these on, so I'm going to opt in for one gun that will hopefully resemble a Chaos Dwarf blunderbuss. The Fortified Manor kit really came to my rescue again here, as it has so many of these little chimneys, and these can be easily fashioned into some cannons. I also decided to stick one of these on the side of one of the tanks to act as kind of like a pressure release valve or an outlet sort of thing. The leftover chimney top I had kind of resembled a horn to me, so I stuck these on the front of the Daemon to give it more of a bull-like look. To finish up, I then prepped and stuck down the platform, and then prepped my Dwarf crew, which are the Death Rocket Chaos Dwarfs, and I feel like these guys look like heavy machinery operators, so they fit in nicely. I also got an old Chaos Warrior shield ready to paint, and I'll stick this onto the front of this big tractor-like looking machine. So all the parts are now done, and it's time to slap some paint on this bad boy. But before we kind of move on to that, I just wanted to let you guys know that the Anvil of Doom web store finally has 2 new prints up. These 2 prints were illustrated by myself, and there's a limited number. So if you want to jazz up your hobby space, head on over to the Anvil of Doom web store to grab yours today. And remember, once they're gone, they're gone. They won't be reprinted. That's it. They do come signed and numbered. I've also got a limited number of stickers available, so if you like stickers, go to the Anvil of Doom web store. What are you waiting for? Anyway, the link is in the bio, and let's slap some paint on this thing. For this video, I'll keep the painting very straightforward and short because there is only so many times I can show you guys how to paint red and blue. So if you want more detail or painting tips for Chaos Dwarfs, head on over to my Chaos Dwarf Death Rocket video after this one. Now, as you can see, I haven't stuck this chaotic lump of bits together just yet because there are way too many overlapping parts. I would be in the nightmare realm if I were to paint this thing assembled. I've kind of measured everything up as best as I could, but at this point in the process, I'm not 100% sure if it's all going to work and fit together. I'm just praying to Hashut that it will. I don't want the side walls to be one flat color with no dimension or detail, so I'm going to freehand on some red timber panels. Now this isn't as hard as it looks. I just leave my darkest color down, which is corn red, to look like the shadow of the gaps in between the timber, and then I go through my lighter colors, highlighting little lines to give it a textured look. I then used the same technique for all the areas that I wanted a blue timber texture on. My Chaos Dwarfs obviously don't mind painting their war machines bright red and blue, and I feel like it gives them that classic 4th edition look. Now on my last Kitbash video where I created a throne of power pulled by a pony, I said that I was going to have to paint my way out of the little design mistakes I made, and I'm literally doing the same thing here. In hindsight, if I made the side walls out of clay, I could have added some sculpted texture, which would have been way easy to pick up with a wash, but you live and you learn. The amount of anticipation I was feeling while painting this thing was crazy. I kept looking at all the parts and thinking, you better fit together or this whole 2 weeks has been a waste of time. After wasting my time on that giant, I was getting a little nervous that this video is never going to see the light of day. But we are here now, so it must have worked out. Anyway, after slapping down some paints on all the main larger areas like the reds, the blues, the blacks, and the true metallics, I decided it was time to tie this thing together with some freehands. Now, I love a good freehand, and I guarantee the more you practice this, the more comfortable you'll be with it and the more fun you'll have with it. In the beginning, I was scared to attempt anything like this because I didn't want to stuff up my paint job, but I've really warmed up to it lately. When freehanding, I like to start out with my darker colors and then slowly build the shape of what I'm painting, like this skull for example, and then fill it in with my base color. So if you're doing a skull, I recommend Xandri Dust. Then I highlight each of the edges or around the eyes and nose area, adding bone white to the mix until it's looking a bit more like a skull. These highlights will give it some dimension and make it really stand out. I'm thinking about making a more in-depth tutorial on freehanding in the future, so let me know in the comments if that's something you'd like to see. After the front shield was done, I then went around the mini, adding more lightning bolts where it needed it, or to areas that I feel were a bit bare. Now it's time for the moment of truth, and it's time to build this thing, and I was pretty nervous about this because I didn't know if it was all going to fit together. I gave myself plenty of time to stick this thing together because rushing and using high strength glue can end up being a massive disaster, especially if you spent over 30 hours on creating something. I started with the simple stuff like gluing the skis on the back timber shafts, then I glued the wheels in the front, making sure they lined up correctly. I then glued the tanks together using some 2-part epoxy resin, as these parts of the build were metal and super glue won't cut it. Then it was time for the freehand shield on the front of the tank, and I'm not gonna lie, I was getting pretty excited here because everything was working really well and coming together, and it was going much better than I expected. I then glued the front cannon on and then moved to the Death Rocket trailer, which I attached to the back of the Daemon engine. And that's pretty much it. Here is one Kitbash Chaos Dwarf Daemon engine. Thanks so much for sticking around to the end of the video, guys. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to stay up to date with all my latest videos. I have to say a massive thank you to my friends and Patreons for all the support. I really couldn't have made this video without you guys. And if you want to join the Anvil of Doom Patreon, the link is in the bio. Anyway, guys, let me know what you want to see next on the channel down in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time. Cheers.